Captain Isaac Ward stood in the vast, glowing chamber of the Angrily high citadel, his polished boots clicking softly against the crystal floor as he approached the towering throne of Princess Syrixa, the heir to the Angrily Empire. The room was silent, save for the low hum of hovering guards and the distant crackle of bioelectric light that filled the air with a faint violet shimmer. Syrixa sat tall, cold, and impossibly still, her silver eyes studying him without a flicker of emotion. The Angrelians were known across the galaxy for their calm, telepathic discipline and their deep mistrust of human impulsiveness. But Isaac wasn't like most diplomats. He was a soldier once, brave but rough around the edges, sent now on a delicate mission to finalize a peace treaty between Earth and the Angrelians. As he began to speak, offering words of honor, trade, and unity, he couldn't ignore the strange feeling growing in his chest whenever his gaze met Syrixa's. She wasn't just beautiful in an alien way, with skin that shimmered like starlight and hair that floated like ink in water. She was powerful, sharp, and quietly curious in a way that unsettled him. As the ceremony continued, tension pulsed through the room like static. Syrixa remained unmoved, responding only with short nods, her voice rarely used except when required by custom. Then, during a pause in the proceedings as silence filled the chamber once more and all eyes rested on him, Isaac felt something snap inside him, some mixture of stress, admiration, and reckless honesty that had built up over days of negotiations and silent staring contests. Without planning it, he spoke the words that would change everything. "I think I'm in love with you," he said, clear and calm, but burning inside with the weight of his confession. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The entire room stiffened. The Angrily guards leaned forward slightly, confused. Advisors exchanged telepathic glances. But Syrixa's expression didn't change at first. Then her eyes narrowed, glowing ever so slightly brighter, and her lips parted with one word that cut through the still air like a blade. "Shut up." She stood, her robe flickering like dark fire, and walked out without another word. "The council," murmured in their silent language, and Isaac was left alone in the center of the throne room, heart pounding, shame blooming like wildfire across his face. He had made a mistake, one that might doom the treaty and brand Earth as unstable and emotionally dangerous. Minutes later, 2 Angrily soldiers approached him with glowing cuffs. "You are summoned for trial," one said without emotion. "Crime, emotional contamination of royalty." Isaac tried to speak, but his voice caught in his throat. He knew the Angrelians saw human emotion as a form of psychic disease, and what he had done might be seen not as love, but as an attack on their future queen. He was taken to a cold chamber deep beneath the city, with strange glowing runes circling the walls, meant to block psychic influence. Alone, he stared at his reflection in the black glass. Why had he said it? Why now? He had met diplomats and leaders across the galaxy, but something about Syrixa haunted him, like her silence was louder than words, like her mind was constantly fighting something unseen. The next morning, he was escorted to the grand hall of balance, a place where justice was spoken and fate rewritten. Syrixa was already there, standing in a beam of pale light, looking untouched by sleep. She wouldn't look at him. The council began, their voices echoing in strange chimes as they translated thought to speech. Captain Isaac Ward, you stand. Accused of telepathic disruption, emotional trespass, and dishonoring sacred protocol, said the lead elder. Isaac raised his head. I didn't mean to cause harm, he said simply. I spoke the truth. Syrexa was asked to speak. She stepped forward, stiff and unreadable. He violated the peace of the accord, she said coldly. He disturbed the sanctity of our alliance with ... emotion. But something flickered in her tone, an undercurrent of confusion, of hesitation. Isaac saw it. The council did too. Do you believe he tried to control your thoughts? Asked one elder. Syrexa paused, her glow pulsing lightly, then answered, no. But his words were ... dangerous. Isaac stepped forward, feeling the eyes of a dozen alien leaders on him. To humans, love is not a weapon, he said. It's not manipulation. It's a truth we live with, sometimes against our will. You think emotions are flaws, but they're what make us stand for something bigger than ourselves. I'm not trying to control her. I just saw something in her that I couldn't ignore. The hall fell silent. For the first time, Syrexa looked at him directly. Her eyes were unreadable. Then she said, not loudly but clearly, You've put both our species at risk. She turned and walked away again, but this time her voice trembled. Slightly, not in fear, but in something dangerously close to emotion. The council adjourned for deliberation. Isaac remained in place, surrounded by silence and suspicion, but deep inside, a new feeling was rising, not regret, not fear, but the sense that this moment was not the end, but the beginning of something far stranger and far more important than he had ever expected. Captain Isaac Ward stood inside the glowing walls of the Grand Hall of Balance, his hands behind his back, his heart thudding like a slow drum. The chamber was colder than before, or maybe it was just the tension in the air. Tall Zerelli counselors floated slightly above the polished floor, their long robes flickering like liquid silver as they circled him. Above them all, Princess Syrexa sat silently on a raised platform, her eyes sharp and distant, her expression unreadable. Isaac had never felt so exposed in his life. Not during battles, not during the loss of comrades. This moment felt different. He was not being judged for a mistake in war or a failed order. He was being judged for feeling something the Zyrelians believed was dangerous. As the lead elder began to speak, his voice like a whisper inside Isaac's head, the human diplomat struggled to stay calm. You are here for emotional violation, said the elder. Do you confess your actions before the council? Isaac lifted his chin. I admit what I said, he replied. But I did not intend harm. I only spoke from the heart. A quiet murmur rippled through the mental network of the Zyrelians, a whisper of silent judgment. Syrexa said nothing, though Isaac saw her fingers twitch slightly in her lap. The elder turned toward her. Princess Syrexa, do you confirm the words spoken by the human? She stood slowly, her robe dragging like mist across the floor. He said those words. In a moment of peace, in a moment that demanded only focus and discipline, he disrupted our unity. Her voice was calm, but Isaac noticed the faintest hesitation in her last word. He wanted to speak, but the elder raised a hand. And do you believe, the elder asked Syrexa, that this emotion was a calculated tool to weaken your mind? Silence fell again. Syrexa's glow dimmed just slightly. She looked at Isaac for a long moment. Then she said, "No, I do not believe it was an attack." More whispers passed through the chamber, both spoken and unspoken. This answer changed something. It was unexpected. Zerials didn't believe in accidents when it came to feelings. To them, emotion was chaos, and chaos meant destruction. Isaac could feel the tension shifting. He stepped forward, voice steady but full of quiet fire. "I know your people see emotions as weakness," he said. "But for humans, emotions are strength. We don't run from them. We don't lock them away. They help us stand, even when the galaxy pushes us down." I didn't plan to say what I did, but it was true. And I won't lie to this council just to make myself seem less human. Some counselors turned their eyes away. Others leaned forward, intrigued. Syrixa didn't move. Then the elder said, "You speak boldly, Captain Ward, but truth alone does not make peace. It must be weighed, understood, and judged." The council recessed into silence, their minds linked in deep thought. Guards motioned for Isaac to leave the center, and he was guided to a nearby chamber where he waited, pacing like a caged animal. Hours passed. Shadows shifted along the crystal walls. Then, without warning, the door opened, and Syrixa stood there, alone. Her face was blank, but her eyes were searching. "You made it worse," she said, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. "They were already uncertain about humans. Now they're afraid." Isaac frowned. "Afraid? Of V? What? That someone might care about them?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she moved to the edge of the room, touching the smooth glass that looked out over the city's lower levels. "My people once had emotions like yours," she said quietly. "Long ago. It nearly destroyed us. The wars were endless. Cities burned. Entire families turned against each other because of feelings that twisted into hate, jealousy, rage." She turned to him. "We gave up emotion to survive. We evolved past it. Now you brought it back like poison carried." In a smile, Isaac stepped closer. "I'm not asking you to become like us. I just want to be honest. With myself, with you." Syrixa's face remained still, but her fingers tightened around the edge of the glass. "I didn't ask for your honesty," she said. "I asked for diplomacy. You gave me disruption." There was pain in her voice, though she tried to hide it. Isaac softened. "Then why are you here? Why not let them judge me?" Syrixa turned sharply, voice low. "Because I don't know what I feel." Her words hung in the air, heavy and real. "And that's dangerous." A pause followed, deep and uncertain. Isaac stepped back. "You don't have to feel anything, but I do, and I won't pretend I don't." Her eyes met his, glowing with an inner storm she couldn't control. "You've already changed the future," she whispered. "You may have started something. Neither of us can stop." Just then, a loud chime rang through the walls. The council had made their decision. They were summoned back to the hall. Syrixa gave him one last look, then walked ahead, her figure straight and strong, though Isaac could see the tension in her every step. Inside the grand hall again, the council stood in a perfect circle. The lead elder spoke. "Captain Isaac Ward, by the vote of the council, we find your actions." A long pause followed. Isaac held his breath. Double quotes, ... not an act of war, but a breach of accord. You will not be punished under Zireli law. However, further emotional outbursts will end negotiations. Relief flooded Isaac's chest, but it didn't last. The elder turned to Serixa. However, the princess has requested that you be removed from diplomatic contact until further review. Isaac's heart sank. Serixa looked away. The trial was over. The damage was done. As he was escorted from the chamber, Isaac felt more than just defeat. He felt something unresolved. A thread left hanging. A spark not yet burned out. Something had shifted inside Serixa, even if she wouldn't admit it. And whatever it was, Isaac knew this wasn't the end. Something bigger had started, something no law or council could fully control. Beneath the shining towers of the Zireli capital, deep below the grand citadel where the council had cast their judgment, Captain Isaac Ward sat alone in a quiet chamber. Meant for observers and outcasts, his thoughts spinning like broken stars through his mind as he stared out the narrow window into the city's underlayers, where glowing tunnels and mechanical veins pulsed with the silent heartbeat of the alien world. But something about the quiet didn't sit right with him, and after hours of restless pacing and silence, he heard a distant humming. Not mechanical, not natural, but sharp and rhythmic, like a whisper being repeated again and again through metal. And when the floor beneath him trembled ever so slightly, he knew something wasn't right, so he pressed his hand against the wall and felt the faintest vibration, steady and growing. And it was then that the lights flickered for half a second, an impossibility in Zireli technology, and for a race obsessed with perfection and order, any flicker meant something dangerous was moving in the shadows. So Isaac, no longer a diplomat but still a soldier at heart, made his way toward the sealed hallway door, testing it carefully, and to his surprise it opened with a slow hiss. Not locked or guarded, just left unattended, which was even stranger, so he stepped out and began moving downward, drawn by instinct. And as he passed through silent corridors lit by dim violet light, he started to notice scorch marks along the walls, small and hidden but recent. Signs of damage that had been cleaned too quickly, covered up. And when he turned the corner and saw a collapsed security drone, half melted and humming with static, he knew something had gone very wrong, something the council hadn't told anyone about, and it wasn't long before he reached a metal door that looked older than the others, its edges rusted and patched with strange glowing sealants, and beside it was a maintenance terminal blinking in an emergency code that even Isaac, unfamiliar with Zireli script, could tell meant danger. So he pried the panel open and used the manual override training from his old Earth missions, guiding his fingers, and as the door slid open with a sharp hiss, heat washed over him, dry and stale, like air that had been trapped for too long. And before him was a long, dark shaft that led deeper into the foundation of the city, into a place not meant for humans or Zirelians, and he hesitated only a second before descending the emergency ladder into the shadows below, each step echoing in the emptiness, each breath louder than the last, until finally his boots touched down on solid floor. And what he saw made his skin go cold. A wide chamber filled with twisted machinery, some of it broken, some still active. And in the center was a giant sealed structure pulsing with unnatural light, black cables wrapped around it like veins, and beside it stood something even worse, a humanoid shape, pale and tall, its body made of writhing lines and humming energy. its face blank, its eyes glowing with red light not of Zirelli origin. And Isaac froze, because he had read the old Earth reports, the ones kept secret from public knowledge, about a species long thought extinct. The Null, a race that fed on thought, on emotion, on the psychic bonds of advanced civilizations, and they were supposed to be gone, wiped out by galactic alliances. Centuries ago, but here one stood, attached to the very roots of the Zirelli capital like a parasite, and it turned toward him slowly, reacting to his presence, its eyes locking onto him, not with rage, but with hunger. And in a flash it lunged, but before it could reach him, a burst of light slammed into it from the side, and sent it crashing into the wall. And Isaac turned to see Syrexa standing behind him, her robe half torn, her glow unstable, her expression filled with something between fury and fear, and she shouted, "You weren't supposed to come down here," before firing another pulse of pure energy at the creature, driving it back. And Isaac, stunned but not frozen, pulled a small defense pistol from his side and joined in, firing shots at the monster while Syrexa unleashed a storm of psychic force, their attacks pushing the Null creature back toward the strange, sealed machine it had emerged from. And when the creature shrieked, 1,000 whispering voices echoed through the chamber, voices that spoke in dead languages, voices that tried to pull fear and doubt from Isaac's mind, but he fought them off, focused on Syrexa, and together they forced the being into the containment field, which suddenly lit up and drew it in like a trap, sealing it back inside with a sound like cracking glass, and the chamber went quiet again, the hum of dark energy fading slowly, and for a long moment neither of them spoke, until Isaac, still catching his breath, looked at her and asked, "What is that thing?" And Syrexa, eyes dim and voice trembling, replied, "It is what we buried, ... And what should have stayed buried?" And she explained that centuries ago, during the last days of the Zirelli emotional purge, a rogue faction tried to harness the last emotions left in their kind to summon something powerful, something that could destroy thought itself and remove the chaos of feelings forever. But they failed, and what they summoned had been locked away under the thrones ever since, kept in stasis by machines powered by the very balance of emotion and logic. And lately the emotional wave caused by Isaac's confession, his love, his honesty had created cracks in that balance, weakening the seal and waking the creature, and she looked at him then, not with anger, but with helpless understanding, and said, "You didn't just say you loved me, ... You opened a door," and Isaac, stunned, realized the danger his presence had caused, but also the warning it revealed, because if one Null creature had awakened, there might be others, drawn to planets where strong emotions and psychic bonds lived unchecked. And he said, "Then we have to stop it before it spreads." And Syrexa, her voice quiet, nodded, saying yes, but no one can know. Not yet. And she turned away, leading him back up the ladder, sealing the chamber behind them, leaving the dark truth hidden once more beneath the throne, where danger still stirred, waiting for the next spark of feeling to break free. Got Isaac. Ward stood outside the Royal Observatory, hidden in the shadow of an ice spire that reached toward the violet sky, his breath misting in the cold air of the upper levels of Zirelli Prime. And though the city above was quiet and graceful, the memory of what he had seen beneath the thrones still burned in his mind, a fire that could not be put out, because deep under all the peace and order Something old and dangerous was waking, something that fed on feelings, something that was starting to grow stronger. And he knew now that his simple words, his confession too. Syrixa had not only broken tradition, but had shaken the foundations of a civilization. But what worried him more was the silence that followed, because since the incident in the hidden chamber, Syrixa had gone quiet, not just with him, but with everyone, keeping to her quarters, holding counsel only with the elders, and refusing any communication. And that was not like her, not the version of her he had come to know, the one who once defied expectations and protected him in secret. So Isaac decided to act, not as a diplomat, not even as a soldier, but as someone who could no longer sit still while shadows moved beneath polished floors, and with help from a low-ranking engineer who still respected him despite the council's warnings. He accessed a forgotten tunnel leading directly to the ice district, a frozen labyrinth beneath the observatory once used for deep planet weather control. And as he made his way into it, the air grew colder, but the deeper he went, the more the frost began to change. It started to shimmer strangely, not with light, but with a flicker that reminded him of the knoll, and soon he saw cracks along the walls, glowing faintly with pulsing red lines, and then he heard the hum again, the same dangerous rhythm from before, not loud but alive, echoing through ice as if it were feeding on the planet's very structure. And Isaac gritted his teeth, pushing forward until he reached the heart of the district, a central chamber that was never meant for human eyes, a place where emotional energy was once harvested long ago and then frozen in time. And at the center of it stood Syrixa, her robe torn again, her hands glowing with blue flame that flickered as she struggled to contain a rising heat from below the floor. And when she saw him, she didn't shout, didn't tell him to leave. She only looked at him with eyes that burned with something new fear mixed with something unspoken. And she said, "It's not just waking up, it's spreading." And Isaac stepped toward her, watching the frost beneath her feet melt into a pool of swirling energy, bright and wild. And she explained quickly and in pieces that the null wasn't alone, that its presence had reactivated the emotional scars buried deep in the city's history, and now frozen memories, feelings once sealed away by ancient minds, were breaking free, twisting into energy that the creature below was absorbing through cracks in the foundation. And she could feel it, not just as a princess, but as someone who was starting to change, because ever since Isaac had said those words, something had stirred inside her too, something the Angrily teachings had tried to remove for generations, and now it made her unstable, her control breaking down. And Isaac reached out, taking her hand, feeling the heat and the trembling, and said softly, "Then you're not alone anymore." And that small touch was enough to make the room flicker, the walls flashing with a pulse of ancient memory, laughter, sorrow, rage, love, all flickering like ghosts trapped in glass. And Syrixa gasped, saying, "It's reacting to us. It wants the emotion. It feeds on it." And just then a loud crack echoed through the chamber, and a fissure split open behind them, from which a black mist poured out like smoke in water, taking shape into another figure, taller than before, more defined, its limbs sharp and moving like liquid metal. And it had no face, but its presence was like pressure in Isaac's mind, squeezing thoughts and memories as if trying to rip them out. And Syrixa shouted, firing a blast of pure mental force at it. But the creature twisted through it, forming multiple limbs that clawed across the ice walls, and Isaac grabbed a shock flare from his belt and hurled it, watching the creature recoil from the sudden burst of light and emotion combined. And in that moment, Syrixa turned to him, her voice urgent, saying, "The old systems, the stabilizers in the frost core, they were built to trap not just energy, but feelings. They can hold it again if we overload them." And Isaac nodded, following her as she led him through a side tunnel to the core chamber, where massive machines stood dormant, old, and humming, with weak power. And as Syrixa accessed the controls, Isaac defended the entrance, blasting back at the creeping mist that poured into the hallway, more of the null's energy reaching for them, whispering promises of peace and power, of forgetting pain and hiding from feeling forever. But Isaac didn't stop, didn't listen, because now he understood this was not just about him or Syrixa or diplomacy. This was a battle between feeling and void, between the fire of life and the frost of silence. And when the core finally powered up, Syrixa screamed as she poured her unstable emotions into it, anger, sadness, confusion, love, all of it forced through her hands and into the system. And Isaac joined her, placing his hand against hers, letting his memories flow too, of Earth, of comrades lost, of joy and pain and hope. And the machine began to glow, brighter than the city lights above, and the mist shrieked, folding in on itself as the emotional surge lit up the tunnels, cracking the ice and sending waves of force outward. And with a final burst, the null energy was pulled into the frost core, sealed once more behind walls of ancient design, and the chamber fell quiet again, steaming, glowing softly. As Syrixa collapsed to her knees, her eyes wide with tears, she had never known how to cry, and Isaac knelt beside her, holding her close, both of them shaking, both of them knowing this was not the end, only the beginning of something larger, because now the city above would feel the tremors, the council would sense the change, and the other slumbering things, wherever they were in the galaxy, would begin to stir, drawn by the return of something long forgotten. Emotion. Isaac Ward stood in front of the High Council once again, but this time there was no trial, no crowd, no speech, only silence, and the sharp eyes of beings who now feared what they could not explain, because the princess, Syrixa, had broken centuries of tradition by allowing herself to feel, and worse, she had not denied it, had not hidden it, and Isaac, the human outsider, had stood with her in the fire and frost, fighting a threat long buried beneath the planet's perfect surface. And now both stood accused, not in name, but in silence, in cold glances and whispers behind chamber walls. And though the null had been sealed again, the damage had been done, not to the city, but to its beliefs, its faith in a life without emotion, because cracks had formed in more than just the ice, and those who had felt nothing for centuries were beginning to question if that stillness was safety or slavery. And Isaac saw it in their faces, in the way guards hesitated to speak to him, in the way a few younger Xyrilians had started asking questions. But questions in this place were dangerous, and Syrixa knew it, so she had hidden, away once more, not from fear, but from the weight of knowing that one wrong move could cause war within her own people. And now Isaac walked the halls alone, watched and judged, a symbol of disruption, and it was during one quiet evening when he felt the tension break, when 3 armored sentinels came to his quarters and told him the council had summoned him, in secret, And as he followed them through a back route toward the Temple of Memory, an ancient tower rarely used, except for the most sacred rituals, he felt something wrong in the air. A charge, a stillness too heavy to be natural. And when the doors opened and he saw not the full council, but only 3 elders standing in a half-lit circle, he knew this was not a meeting, but a warning. And one of them, Elder Davis, stepped forward, his voice slow and cold, as he said, "You've undone more in 1 week than the stars have shaped in 500 years. And Isaac listened as the elder accused him, not of crime, but of heresy, of corrupting the future princess, of awakening forbidden emotions, of disturbing the sacred balance. And when Isaac spoke, calmly, firmly, telling them of the knoll, of the danger beneath their feet, they only listened in silence, as if his words were waves crashing against stone. And then Davis said, "The creature you claim to have fought Syraxus sealed it alone? Yes? No one saw it but you and her. A human, an emotional creature from a backward planet. Why should we believe you?" And Isaac realized then that they would never admit the truth, because the truth threatened their control. And as he was led back to his chamber, not locked, but under watch, he knew that the council had made its choice. They would bury the past again, even if it meant losing the future. And later that night, when Syraxa appeared in his room, cloaked and breathless, her glow dim with fear, she said, "They're planning something. I heard the elders speaking to the temple keepers. They're going to erase you." And Isaac stared at her, not quite understanding, and she whispered, "Not kill, erase. Remove all memory of you from the archive, as if you never arrived, as if nothing happened." And the weight of that hit him harder than any weapon, because on this world history was power, and to be erased meant more than death. It meant silence forever. And Syraxa, trembling, said she had stolen access keys, that she could hide him for a while. But Isaac shook his head and said, "No, if they erase me, they erase the warning. We have to show the people the truth." And so they made a plan, dangerous and desperate, to sneak into the Temple of Echoes, a forbidden place where raw memory was kept unfiltered, where the past could be shown, not told, through vision and sound. And if they could show the truth of the knoll to the citizens through the public archive, then no elder could hide it again. And so they moved at night, slipping through forgotten vents and maintenance shafts, reaching the temple's deep core where the ancient projectors waited. And Isaac carried with him a small sphere, Syraxa's recording of the knoll's attack, raw and real, created in secret during the Frost Core battle. And when they reached the chamber, the doors creaked open, and Isaac stepped forward to insert the memory, only to be stopped by a voice behind him, one that sent ice through his veins. And he turned to see Davis standing there, not alone, but with 2 robed warriors, and something worse, a second knoll, smaller than the one before, contained in a crystal prism, pulsing like a dark heart. And Davis said, "We thought we buried the past, but some pasts are useful. Some weapons deserve to be remembered." And in that moment Isaac understood that not all the council feared the knoll. Some wanted to control it, to use it as a tool to purge emotions permanently, to burn away all doubt with fear. And Syraxa cried out, "You lied, you knew what it was." And Davis said coldly, "Emotion is a sickness, and now we have the cure." And he raised his hand, signaling the guards to take them. But Isaac didn't run. Instead, he lunged for the projector, slamming the memory sphere into its core, and the device exploded with light, flooding the chamber with raw images. The Null's attack, the screams, the fire, the fear, and the final sacrifice that sealed it away, and the light struck the prism holding the second Null, which began to crack, unable to handle the surge of real feeling. And in the chaos, Isaac grabbed Cyrex's hand and shouted, "Run!" As the creature within the prism broke free, not fully formed, but alive enough to attack, its screams shaking the temple, and the guards fell back in panic as Davis tried to control it, speaking ancient commands, but it didn't listen, didn't care, because the Null was no tool. It was hunger and void and vengeance. And in the confusion, Isaac and Cyrexa escaped, running into the archive hall just as the memory finished projecting, and there stood dozens of citizens, drawn by the light, watching in silence as the truth played before them. And when it ended, there was only silence, then whispers, and then a roar, not of anger, but of awakening, as minds long silent stirred with doubt and wonder. And Isaac turned to Cyrexa, seeing in her eyes not just fear, but strength, and he knew then that they had started something that could not be stopped, not by memory wipes, not by old traditions, not even by fear, and far above, in the stars something else watched, for the signal of the second Null's escape had spread beyond the planet, reaching minds that remembered what the Zereli tried to forget, and the fire beneath the frost was now an open flame. The city of Zereli, Prang stood quiet under a blood-orange sky as 2 moons passed over its towers, casting long shadows across frozen domes and silver bridges, and in that silence a strange tension hummed in the air, because though the Null had been exposed and the truth revealed, peace had not returned. Instead, it had shattered, leaving behind questions, fear and fire. And Isaac Ward, the human who was once seen as a guest, then a threat, now walked as a symbol, watched by many and followed by whispers. For some believed he brought chaos, others believed he brought hope, but no one could ignore him anymore, especially not Cyrexa, the strange princess who had once told him to shut up, who had tried to hide her heart, her thoughts, her fire, but who now stood with him, no longer silent, no longer cold, because together they had cracked open something buried too long. And now the city trembled, not from war, but from change. And on the edge of the city, where the towers met the ice fields, stood a new structure. Not a palace, not a weapon, but a listening tower built in secret by Cyrexa and those who still believed in emotion and truth. And inside it, Isaac worked beside her, building a signal strong enough to warn other worlds. For the burst of null energy released weeks ago had been detected in deep space, and something or someone was coming in answer to that call, not friendly, not curious, but drawn by hunger, by the scent of unsealed feeling. And Isaac knew Earth could be next, or any world still open to emotion. And as he adjusted the signal dish, Cyrexa entered quietly behind him, her steps softer now, her voice no longer distant, and she said, "I heard from the Eastern Watch something's moving beyond the frost belt." And Isaac turned, his heart heavy, because he had feared this, had dreamed it night after night, a shadow with no shape, a hunger that crossed stars without making a sound. And he asked, "How long?" And she answered, "1 rotation, maybe 2, and they both understood what that meant less than a day before contact. Less than a day before everything they had fought for would be tested. And outside the tower, a crowd had begun to gather, not with weapons, but with eyes, full of fear and minds full of questions, because the council was crumbling. The elders had lost control, and the people were looking for answers, for leadership, and many looked to Syrexa now not because of her title, but because she had chosen to feel, to change, and Isaac saw the weight of that on her face, the pressure of it, and he said softly, "You don't have to do this alone." And she looked at him, really looked, and nodded, then reached for his hand, her fingers trembling slightly, but warm, alive, and they stood like that for a moment before alarms sounded from the tower base, flashing red against the cold walls, and a voice came through the speakers, shaking with panic. Unidentified object descending entry path not natural, prepare for breach. And Isaac felt his stomach twist, because it had begun, the arrival of something born in the dark, and as he and Syrexa rushed to the control deck, the skies above turned gray, then black, then filled with swirling lights that were not stars, and from those lights came a shape. Not a ship, not a being, but a mass pulsing and wide, like a storm made of memory and shadow, and the sensors screamed with readings fear, sorrow, rage, longing, all emotions, too big to belong to any one creature. And Isaac understood then. What they faced, it was not a null, not exactly, but a gathering of lost thoughts and broken feelings from across the galaxy, drawn here by the energy of the Frost Core, and it wanted release, wanted to devour every spark of feeling it could find. And in the tower, Syrexa turned to him and whispered, "It's not just one. It's many, all connected, all hungry." And Isaac knew then that weapons would not be enough. That cold steel could not fight something born of thought and pain. And suddenly he remembered something from Earth, an old story of how sound could break glass, how music could calm storms, and he looked at the transmitter dish and said, "We don't fight it, we show it what feeling really means." And Syrexa understood, rushing to the console and rewiring the energy flow, connecting the memory archives to the tower's speaker system, and together they selected the recordings, moments of truth, of joy, of pain, of love, raw, real, human, and Angrily. And Isaac added one final piece, a short message, his own voice saying, "Feeling isn't weakness. It's life." And then they activated the signal, and the tower shook as memory burst into the air, waves of emotion rising into the sky and striking the creature above, not as weapons, but as mirrors, and the mass howled, 1,000 voices. In one twisting in the sky like a wounded storm, because it could not feed on this, it could not consume what was freely given. What was shared, not feared, and Syrexa cried out as the room filled with heat and color, and Isaac held her close, his own memories rising with the broadcast, his childhood, his first mission, the fear of being alone, and then the day he arrived here, and the moment he met her, and the sky pulsed brighter, and the shadow broke apart, screaming not in victory but in confusion, in agony, and one by one the pieces began to fall, not crashing but dissolving, becoming harmless sparks that faded into the clouds. And when it was over, the sky was clear again, and the city was still, and the people stepped out into the frost, looking up, feeling something they had never dared feel before, awe, hope, sadness, all at once. And Syrexa, standing beside Isaac, breathing hard, whispered, We did it." And he turned to her, smiling softly, and said, "No, you did." And she looked at him, eyes wide, and for the first time, she smiled back, not as a princess, not as a weapon, but as someone real. And as the crowd below began to cheer, as the stars returned to the sky, Isaac leaned closer and said, "I meant it. You know what I said that day?" And Syrinx's face turned warm with color, and she looked down for a moment, then back at him, and though her voice was quiet, her words were clear. "Then shut up, and don't ever leave." And the tower stood tall above them, a beacon of memory, of feeling, of something new, and far beyond the stars others began to hear it, too.